Norris, you, of course, are the author, compiler, or editor. What do you call yourself of the Guinness Book of Records?
Yes, well, I put it together.
Why do you think people buy it every year? I mean, it's a great book, and I have to say, I think I've bought it at least 23 of the 26 years, but why do people go on buying it? I mean, every year it goes to #1 on the book charts.
Well, I think because 22 to 23% of it gets out of date every year, and that this obsolescence is so high that last year's edition is no good, so you've got to have this year's.
So like all the best or worst American cars, it has built-in obsolescence?
Exactly, like an American car, yes.
Do you ever get a bad year, like a bad Beaujolais, when no records are broken?
No, that never happens. Every year is a vintage year as regards breaking records, and next year will be an Olympic year, and it'll be even worse, or better, whichever way you look at it.
But it's surely possible that perhaps one year not an awful lot will happen.
No, everything happens. The astounding thing is in things which you think are absolutely settled, you can't break, they get broken. For instance, they even found last year a piece of land further north than the most northerly piece of land ever known. You'd think that was impossible, but these things happen.
What, under the ice was this literally?
Yes, it was under the ice, yes. North of a place called Kaffeklubben Øy, which is the Danish for Ireland, and that is right north of Greenland, closest to the North Pole.
How far away from the North Pole?
Oh, it's about 360 miles, so it's quite a long way.
Quite a slog.
Yes, a long slog, yes.
But there are some records, and I think particularly perhaps of Bob Beeman's long jump record,
yes,
which seems set for a good few years.
Well, even Bob Beeman with his 29-foot 2.5, which he did up at Mexico City in 1968, that is under threat because there's an American now called Larry Marex, and he's jumped 27-foot 11¾ at sea level. Now, at sea level, the resistance is much higher than at altitude, because when you're at altitude, 1.5 miles up in Mexico City,
the air is thinner.
The air is thinner. In fact, it's only 76%, to be precise.
So one would expect any jump at Beeman's level or at Mexico City level to be 20-odd% better.
Yes, yes. Well, he missed out the 28s. He went straight from 27.5 right up.
Has this chap who's been leaping around at sea level tried it up in Mexico City?
No, he hasn't. No, I only hope he does, because if he does, then the great people always say that nobody now alive will ever see that record broken. Bob Beeman's. It was a remarkable record. In fact, it was equivalent to knocking 13 seconds off the mile. So, I mean, it's a tremendous improvement.
How do you classify records? Because, say I was to run 101 yards and say this is the world's fastest 101-yard time, would you let it in?
Certainly not, no, because it would be too ingenious. No, that would just be fudging it. No, records have got to have some sort of significance, and they've got to be internationally competitive, and they've got to be comparable. There are some things which are so crazy that nobody else ever does them, and therefore they haven't really got anything to compare. Say, for instance, the first underwater violinist. Nobody else does it.
There is one?
Oh, there is, yes. A chap called Mark Gottlieb in Oregon, and he's very dead serious. He has waterproof rosin, and he really takes it very, very seriously.
How could you beat it? By staying under longer or playing?
Well, the Japanese have now got an underwater orchestra.
Really?
Yes. So that's the way to beat it.
Are there any records which you wouldn't ever print under any circumstances? I mean, if someone said, I've driven from Piccadilly Circus to the centre of Oxford in 32 minutes, which I've done on several occasions.
Have you?
Would you, in fact, not print that? I mean,
certainly not. No, we don't print anything that's sort of gratuitously dangerous. We don't print records place-to-place driving because innocent people get killed. We know some of the figures, and they're absolutely horrific, but we don't publish them, and nor do anyone else. There's a sort of conspiracy of silence about those sort of things.
Has any unfair or faked record ever got past you?
No, we nearly had one. There used to be a great pub game, and the Guinness book was really invented to settle arguments in 84,000 pubs. That's why it's called Guinness.
Yes.
And what happened was that they used to balance these 12-sided threepenny bits, edge on edge, and the record was 11. And one day we got a claim for 13. Well, that made us immediately suspicious, because people never break records by a bigger margin than you have to. And so I remember phoning this fellow up. He was down in Eastbourne, and I said, and I really want to know just quite how you did this great feat, and eventually admitted how he did it. What he did was he got hold of the coins, he got a card table, He glued the card table to a ceiling. He put a carpet up there and a chair. He suspended them with scotch tape behind them and photographed the whole lot upside down. But luckily he admitted it.
How did the book actually begin? One often hears stories, but you and your brother Ross,
Yes.
was it actually your idea, or
No,
were you approached?
we were commissioned to do it. We were already working on records for a breakfast food company, in fact. And Sir Hugh Beaver, who was the chief executive of Guinness Brewery, was out shooting in Ireland, and he either missed or got, but anyway, he was shooting at a golden plover. And he wanted to know if this was the fastest game bird in Europe. Very expensive reference books, none of them told him the answer. And suddenly it occurred to him in a flash, well, this is exactly the sort of thing people argue about, not golden plovers, but all sorts of things, the greatest weight a man's ever lifted, or the most children any woman's had, these sort of things they argue about. And there's no book you can get which gives you the answer. And he says, right, we will produce such a book. And that's really how it was generated.
Did you anticipate such huge success?
No, not really, because the very first one we produced went off to the chief buyer of the largest wholesale chain in the country, that you would know as an author. And he looked at it, and he wrote down on a pad his order for the whole nation. 6 copies.
6?
6. He now orders 120,000, so it's changed a bit.
What do you think you would have done if it hadn't taken off?
If it hadn't?
Yes. Just
well,
say the idea hadn't worked.
Yes, well, we would have been working on other ideas because we had a fact and figure business, supplying facts and figures to newspapers and yearbooks and other advertisers. And,
so you were in that business already, as it were?
Yes, we were.
And this was the kind of
yes. Well, it was
magic thing.
Yes, it was a phone call from Chris Chataway, actually, that summonsed us to the brewery because he had just got his first job there. And so he was a world record holder for the 3 miles, so it was rather appropriate that it was him.
And how long did he hold that record for?
A very short time. It was overtaken. It was 13 minutes 32.2, if I remember rightly. He shared it, actually, with a fellow called Freddie Green, and it was overtaken rapidly. And Vladimir Kutz used to run much faster, but he didn't used to be timed at 3 miles because he was metrically minded.
Because Chataway, I always recall, in fact, beat Kutz in that
He did.
Big
that was a famous
race.
5,000 metres. Yes, that was about a month after we went to the brewery. It was in October 1954. I well remember it. Everyone was white at the knuckles. It was televised, and it was a tremendous race.
Now, if I can perhaps get on to you yourself very briefly, Norris, to end up with. You, of course, lost, tragically, Ross 4 years ago. Has that made a colossal difference? I mean, obviously it's made a great difference to your life, but do you find that you can function just as well on your own, or being an identical twin, have you lost something more than if you just lost a brother, especially someone who was so closely involved in all your work?
Well, an identical twin is really genetically the same person, and really every day I miss him because his knowledge in certain fields was better than mine, and we worked so closely together, and also you had the opportunity of discussing things, and in that way one either had to be halved or doubled, as it were, and one has to make double the effort to be the same person.
But the book, despite the tragic loss of Ross, has gone on from strength to strength. I mean, your team behind you, presumably...
It's got a wonderful team of people. They're very enthusiastic. They work very hard. And I think people are happier when they work hard. We're now in 24 languages, and so it sells about 75,000 a week, and it's hard keeping it going.
Not surprised. And, of course, you yourself are actually in your own book as the...
Yes, well, we had to put it in because we overtook Dr.
Modest
Spock.
though you were.
Well, yes, well, we have to record records. Yes. And Dr. Spock we overtook in November 1974.
And as Dr. Spock, I believe, disowns virtually everything he ever said. It's probably justice, in fact, that he's been booted out of your book.
Yes, Dr. Spock is a very interesting character. I'd love to meet him because he, in fact, won a gold medal for rowing in the Olympics in 1924.
No,
and
really?
I only discovered that fairly recently.
Good heavens. Norris McWhirter, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, this is the end.